So we're almost live for those who just come in. Let us know in the chat using text or emojis what your favorite topping on pizza is. And feel free to comment on each other's favorite pizza. Awesome, we are live. So we're super excited to be here today with Nicholas and Joey and our friendly moderator from our events team, Brenda. And thank you to ADP Liz for helping us bring us together on talking about educating friends and families on differences between UX and UI. And sometimes when you think about how you want to describe UX and UI, you think of the ketchup bottle, but there's definitely different ways to describe it. And it's also an important topic because, as you probably know, on LinkedIn and other like Instagram, different social media platforms, there's always a lot of like, which UI is better posts, but that's not like the best way to go about it. And also, this is kind of the first time today that we have 2 events in a day. We had 1 event in Singapore this morning. So if you all came to that one, thank you all for coming as well. And I'm going to get started. Oh, you just need pizza with a side of lactose. Nice. Cool. So I'll just share my screen really quick. I'm pretty sure you probably all saw the screen by now, but welcome to Design Buddies. We're a global design community with a lot of resources for all designers from all different backgrounds in life, mostly focused on UX UI, but we're really trying to expand upon beyond that as well. That's why our topic is UX UI today. Feel free to connect with us on any of my social media platforms. And then just for some quick house rules, events are recorded, and by attending, you grant consent. However, you're welcome to watch on YouTube as well. And a YouTube link, you can just find it by searching Design Buddies. It should be one of the first ones. And you're welcome to engage in chat. We like to be super casual, super fun, and comment on anything you want to comment with each other, but make sure to keep all promotional links on the networking sheet. We want to encourage y'all to connect with our speakers and also with each other. And I've made a list of the questions that you have all submitted on Slido, on Luma, but if you have any other questions that come up during our event, you're welcome to submit on Slido. At the end, we also like to take group selfies. And we also have custom Zoom backgrounds in case y'all want to use them as well, that Brenda all dropped in the chat. And feel free to share any takeaways on social media, tag Design Buddies, tag our speakers, connect with each other, and feel free to hop into our Discord and have fun. And let's get started. Cool. So our first question for today is, feel free to just introduce yourself. What are you doing now? And how did you get into what you're doing today? And any fun facts about yourself? And I nominate Nicholas to go first because you're first on my screen.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks so much for having us. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas. I'm a lead product designer at Okta. Okta is an identity and security company based in the Bay Area. I've been at Okta for 3 years. Previous to that, I used to work in healthcare tech in the nonprofit world, which was quite fun and challenging at the same time. I have a background in architecture, so I actually transitioned to UX design or product design a few years myself, and I'm happy to talk about that later if it comes up in any questions. I'm originally from Mexico City and moved to the States like 6 years ago or so. And something about me, I got obsessed with bikes and cycling a few years ago to the point that I decided to design and build my own bike. So that's kind of like the designer that I like to be, just dive into the problems and try to solve them myself.
Awesome, thank you. I also love bikes and cycling too. Joey, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Grace. So hi, everyone. My name is Joey. I am a UX designer. I'm currently at Manulife Financial, based in Toronto. And before that, I was working at a nonprofit / government, GovTech. And before that, I was doing sales and consulting and had come out from school with a sociology degree. A lot of the way that I've learned about like research in sociology, as well as the way that like I learned to talk to people and like gauge what their needs are in sales, informs the way that I work now. And then I don't know any fun facts about me, but I really like goats. So I'll share a fun goat fact. Goats have like different sounds that they make, like the meh or like the bleat. And apparently like scientists went and researched this, but they can communicate their emotions through different bleats and understand when another goat is sad or another goat is like happy. So yeah, that's a fun fact about goats.
Nice. I love goats. That's so awesome. Yeah, I know. So I have a friend who has a pet goat. So yeah, cool. Yeah, liking goat is a fun fact. And like thanks for sharing your goat facts. Cool. Yeah, we're gonna dive into it. Yeah, I love how y'all have kind of like diverse backgrounds in UX. I know a lot of our buddies also come from different fields into UX. And if y'all came from a non-design background into UX or UI, feel free to let us know in the chat. I came from bioengineering and computer engineering as a student. And yeah, so we're going to go right into it. Is how do you define UX and how do y'all define UI? And anyone can go first.
I'll jump in first. So UX and UI are actually really hard for me to separate since I think they kind of like touch into each other. But essentially with UX, more focused on the feeling that people get based on the processes that they go through. So thinking about where their journey is going and the experience that they're getting out of that, and that's the feeling that you sort of get. And then when I think about UI, initially I was just thinking, oh, UI is the interface, it's the pretty parts, but that's not completely it. With good UX, you have good UI, and they work really well together. So with UI, I think there's also still, you're trying to invoke a certain feeling. So are you delighted when you're looking at this interface? Or maybe you don't feel anything at all because it makes so much sense where you go and what the layout looks like and the aesthetic of it. So I would define them in parallel with each other and they kind of work together really well. I have an example that I really like to think of in terms of design, interior design and architecture. Maybe you've heard of this one before, but when my family asks me like what I do, I constantly have to be like, okay, so, you know, when you hire an architect or you hire an interior designer, that person thinks of the blueprints. So they're like, okay, these rooms connect together. And in the bathroom, you kind of have this layout and the structure of things. And then you have your interior designer who knows, okay, great. So in the bathroom, we're going to want these colors. We're going to want the wall to have these tiles and things like that. And you kind of need both to work together to give that delightful feeling or that experience that you get out of it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I like using examples. I saw someone come from healthcare. I like to think of it as like having a human body, like the skeletons, the UX, everything connecting together, and your skin is like the UI. Yeah, so it's a very healthcare related analogy. Well, I hit off to Nicholas if you wanted to add anything too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably just gonna echo what Joey just said, but I think for me, defining the terms, I mean, UX, the term itself talks about experience. So you talk about how you feel when you're using a product, where are you, what are your motivations, what are your frustrations, what are your goals. In terms of UI design or UI user interface design, you're talking more about like the aesthetics of the product, how it looks, how it feels through like the aesthetic themselves, and how you interact with it as well. So for example, some tasks that a UX designer may go through is research, problems, discovery, concepts, solve user problems, prototyping, and generally speaking, improve the experience. While a UI designer may focus more on what happens after. So take like typography, for example, or color, style, branding, and overall page hierarchy. And I definitely agree that there's a lot of overlaps, and it's way more evident on the size of the company or the project you're working on. The smaller the company, usually the overlaps are the bigger, and they are around with a bigger company. But yeah, that's the way I think about it. But they both design what we use, basically.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I see a lot of people coming from a lot of diverse fields into design. So it's also super cool as well. A lot of engineering, actually, just like me. That's cool. Yeah, and another common question that people often ask on like design buddies actually is what are the differences between UX design and product design? I know like UX design, product design, interaction design, UI design. People kind of, I've seen people use them like really interchangeably, but how would you both describe the differences between UX and product design? And anyone can jump in first.
I can take a stab at it, and then Joey can go after.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a pretty interesting way to differentiate UX and product design, same as UI. They're pretty related in many ways. If I try to differentiate it, I would say that UX focuses more on like user satisfaction, like fulfilling user needs, improving overall usability and a little bit of accessibility as well of the product. And usually they go through the full scope of the design thinking process. You do a lot of research, and for the most part, I would define UX designers as people driven, like at all time, like user driven. In terms of product designers, a fun fact, it actually comes from industrial design, even before like UX existed. And in my opinion, the role is quite flexible. So you can think about a product designer more like as a full stack designer. You will do UX, you will also do UI, you may do a little bit of coding, a lot of project management, and also problem solving. My role as a product designer includes sometimes like assemble the teams to facilitate solutions, create test plans, wireframes, A/B tests, and so on. And most importantly, also support the development. So it will include sometimes work really closely with developers through the launch process, and ensure like the brand and the marketing are all related. So to summarize it really quickly, differences, I think a way to think about it is the way the questions UX designers ask. For example, a UX designer may ask, how do I make my design more user-friendly? While a product designer may ask, how do I make my design more cost-effective for the company, right? How may I make my design more aligned with our business needs?
Yeah, that's great, Nicholas. And just to echo that, I think like both designers go through very similar things in terms of you're using design thinking, and both do consider the user. But to me, it comes down to where the majority of the focus is. So UX exists within product. And I think UX designers, I like to think of this as like you go to a restaurant, and in the restaurant, you have someone who, like, is this restaurant one where you have a staff member who handles the phone, but also handles like the cash register, who also handles greeting the customers. And when you have that, that person has to work kind of around the strategy of like, I have to do all of these things. And so when that happens, the focus is kind of on the general, am I doing all of these things? Versus having UX specialized to the user, where you have a staff who just handles greetings. Hi, welcome to this restaurant. And someone who picks up the phone, and someone who handles the cash register. And so I think that specialization is where like that person just has that focus, versus the larger strategy portion, where product would be thinking about UI, would be thinking about the tangible solution that comes out of it, a little bit more in terms of business as well as UX.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just add that product design, when you get to like a bigger company or adding the word product to the title, starts to overlap a lot with product management. A lot of times you end up spending more time writing like requirements and thinking about scenarios, not so much going through like specifics about the actual experience. Maybe UX designers will focus more on that. And same goes to like a UI.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I feel like it's also a little bit different between companies. Like at EA, I was last summer I was a UX design intern, and now I'm doing design, specifically product design, and definitely working more on the requirements as well. And also kind of heading into what you all do in the career. I know, Joey, you're a UX designer, or your job title is UX designer, and Nicholas, your job title is principal product designer. I was wondering if you can talk about, without violating any NDAs, what you do day to day to showcase the differences between UX and product. Only if you want to. Totally cool if not.
I'm happy to. Joey, you want to go first?
calling me out first.
Yep.
Yeah, I do have some people from my company here, so I'm like, what can I say? I think at my company, like we actually, I haven't seen any product designers, so that's the interesting thing. But we have very separate UX, like we have UX designers and we have UI designers, and we work very closely together with business, with the developers to sort of think of those things. But in a previous role where I was in product, um, I can see the difference to the point of Nicholas, where you're focusing on a lot more things, and so there are a lot of elements to think about, and maybe less time to really hone in on one specific aspect. Whereas here, when I had joined the company, and I tried to design my wireframes, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to use the font. I'm going to use the nice colors." I got a little bit of a wrist slap, and they said, "Hey, like let the UI designers handle this. You should focus on delivering, like the experience itself, the journey, and helping our stakeholders understand that part. And it'd be better not to distract with the aesthetics of it, because they're going to nitpick those things." And so it comes down to what you're focusing on. But in terms of my day-to-day, I do very similar things to when I did product design. So I still go through wireframes, I still go through research, talking to people, and then pulling those insights. But I think the focus now for me is a lot more funneled.
That's really interesting. The way Okta is set up, we actually don't have UX designers, like the actual term. We're all product designers. And what it means, at least for me, is we own like the whole process of the area that you're driving. And regardless of your actual level, you are the final decision in that area. It means that you go from the beginning all the way to the end of development and after. So usually the way the teams are set up is there would be a product designer paired with a product manager, and you both own that and drive it together. And in relation, you also have a third person, which is the lead engineer, and that trio will own it and drive everything. In terms of my particular role as a lead product designer, we have a new initiative at the company that I was asked to lead from a product design perspective. And what that means is I work with architects and like lead product managers to define more like the vision or the strategy of where we're trying to go. So a lot of like the things that I actually have to develop every day are more visionary concepts, a lot of diagrams, high level picture. And I work with other product designers or UX designers that they own each of those areas. So they would actually go and further develop, validate, research, and deploy all of those different aspects. Same, like we work closely with our design systems team, which you could call them as more as UI designers, that they develop the components that we use for our designs, for also for our development.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's all interesting to see how all these like different roles operate. Because for me, I guess like my title is just like called designer, but most of my work is like product design. So I do product requirements, user journey, UI design, and design systems, kind of like the whole thing. So it's interesting to hear more about what y'all do. And kind of segueing into the topic of our event, educating friends and family. Question is, I know sometimes when you think about explaining UX to someone when they don't know UX, think of like that ketchup bottle. I think of like the examples from like design everyday things. I guess like for all of our panelists, like how would you describe UX design or UI design, or what do you do to your grandparents?
I've tried that multiple times and failed quite a bit. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I have a background in architecture. And I think the analogy that Joey shared at the beginning about architects designing like a house and UI maybe being industrial design, I tried to explain it that way. Like I'm technically still an architect. I still design for users. I still research the problems, try to validate if those are true, spaces, flows, all of those things. But they happen inside of a product, sort of a screen, rather than in the physical world. That has been somehow successful. I say somehow because at the end of the day, they just look at me like, yeah, sure. But that I found that analogy being pretty useful.
Yeah, same here. So I go through the whole cycle of, okay, think about you wanting to build a house. And then I pull in the developers too, because I also get this question from my parents when they're like, so your friend makes websites and you also make websites? And I'm like, wait. So in the house building analogy, yes, like you have the planner, the person who handles the blueprints, you have the interior designer, you also have the engineers and the people who like know about where the pipes are connected in the back. You don't look at it, but when you turn on you turn on the faucet, the water comes out. And then also just like putting down the floorboards and like actually building the structure that you have. We all sort of work together to make it work. And we all have our own expertise, and like you can build a house like with maybe just house builders, but it comes down to that specialization of what are you looking for and what does each specialist bring in.
Yeah, definitely. When I tried to explain to my grandparents, they didn't understand. Like everyone assumes like I'm a game designer because I work at EA. So they just assume like all designers work on games. But I work on mostly websites and stuff and design systems, which is like different. And I guess like what I end up having, I just like tell my grandparents, they describe my job as a computer job. And so I guess that's how they see it. But I guess how I explained UX to my parents was when they were getting frustrated because of this like user flow on the payment website. I was like, this is why you need UX designers to solve problems on these things. So that helped them, like pointing out like real life examples, help them like understand the importance of it and what it is. Because I feel like growing up in a like I guess with both parents having like science, like a lot of like science degrees, they're like you gotta be a doctor, engineer, lawyer. So like they were a little bit hesitant about design, but like after describing and showing examples of how design helps them in their life, it helped them like understand it more. Yeah, and yeah, I wanted to segue into some like this interesting question. Like, I feel like on LinkedIn, you see a lot of these like which UI is better, or like before and after UI, or before or after UX posts on LinkedIn without any context, which I personally feel doesn't like add an added value because UX UI it's about solving problems for either user need, business goal, or both. I mean both. So yeah, I was just wondering like what are y'all's thoughts on those posts? And I think some of y'all linked an article earlier. Maybe you could share it in a chat as well.
So I have thoughts while we're maybe pulling up the article. I think like, so those posts, like at the core of what it is like a quick, like, let's get an interaction, let's get a response from people. But essentially with how short a post can be and like the visuals of like, you're looking at this thing versus this thing. Most people are just taking in what they can see. And to your point, Grace, the point of design, like for both UX and for both UI, is the thought that comes in behind that, and the rationale, the research, anything that that has led to the solution itself. So that problem solving aspect is lost when people are straight up just looking at, oh, like this button is bigger, or like this, like this looks prettier to me, but that's also like there's no rationale, there's no backup for any of these.
Yeah. Okay.
Grace, I think this is an example you were talking about, right, from that article?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted. You look like you're talking, but I can't hear you. Is it
Can you
me?
hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, not sure what happened. Zoom playing with things. Echoing what Joey was saying, I think that, I mean, we're just showing an example here, but I think it comes down to understanding like the whole like origin of even posting a question like this in LinkedIn or any social media. Like to me, more than really getting an answer, like the answer to which one is better, it's more like a secondary thing. It's more about getting more engagement on that particular account. Usually comes down to just a business strategy to drive more people into their account, their page, their profile, whatever you're trying to do. So I think are like that's just the intent. They're trying to get more likes. But even putting that aside, like Joe was saying, it's pretty like superficial. We're really like understanding the problem you're trying to solve. Both are correct. Like both could work easily. You have to understand the user problem, the flow, the business problem, and basically get the whole picture before even trying to give an answer. If you really wanted to try, I mean, you can start evaluating this from an accessibility standpoint. Like, do both have enough contrast? Do both are readable in all devices and all screens and stuff like that? But I guess that's more of a specific question regarding to the actual screen component, not so much about the whole UX or the whole UI experience.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like a lot of people post these things. I see it on my feed a lot, but later I like told LinkedIn to stop showing them to me, so I stopped seeing them. Is like people trying to get the reaction out of it. It's like people posting they like, should internships be paid? Do we prefer like work from home, work from the office, or hybrid work? Like, I feel like a lot of times people do this for like reactions as well. But you lose the whole context of the problem. Yeah. Yeah, and just for some, I just want to share. I just like, so I was able to pull it up. And so as you can tell, I just searched which UI is better on LinkedIn and just like sorted by post. As you can see, these get a lot of reactions. And yeah, you can see there's a ton of stuff. And then, for example, this one has like 10,000 reactions, like before UX, after UX, but you don't know what problem you're solving. So yeah, I don't know. I just seen so many of these things on LinkedIn that I just wanted to address it. Oh yeah, there's my post. Yeah. So I just thought it was just like interesting to note. But yeah. So we're gonna jump into our next questions. So kind of segueing into more like career tips. I know y'all mentioned like different job titles. There's like UX designer, UI designer, product designer, interaction designer. But this is a question submitted on Luma is how should your case studies or overall portfolio change depending on whether you're applying to a UX designer versus UI designer role?
I can take a pass on it, and then Joe, you can try. I would start by saying I've heard people saying that posting yourself as a UX designer is better than UI, or even product designer is better than UX, which is better than UI. In my opinion, that's not true at all. There's not good or bad answer. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal interest, like what part of the process, if any, you're more interested or more passionate about. And also comes down to like the size of the company you're looking for. Like generally speaking, regardless of your title, if you work at a startup, you may be the only designer or in a small team, and you're probably going to have to work on all of it. You're going to have to own like the UX, the product design, the UI, the details, the deployment, everything. If you start getting into bigger companies, as more people join, people tend to specialize in what they're passionate about. Like UA designers have great jobs sometimes working as design systems developers or designers, and it's a huge, really important part of like the development process. Then you have UX designers, which is focused more on finding the problem, validating that the problem exists, and doing usability tests and all that stuff. And lastly, you have product designers, which may work more on strategy and really close to product managers. So at the end of the day, it comes down to what you're really passionate about, what you want to do. And in terms of the portfolio, my recommendation is just make sure that you represent what the role that you're trying to apply for, or you're trying to go for. If you're trying to get into a design systems team, you may want to post more stuff related to like UI details, components, accessibility, that kind of stuff. You're trying to get in a UX role, maybe showing more like flows and problems and how you go to those solutions and telling a compelling story about it. It's more important. I've actually, one of the UX designers that I recently met, he's one of the best ones I've ever worked with. If you see his portfolio, there's no single UI. Everything's text and ugly diagrams, but he's a great UX designer. Like he's amazing. He just doesn't do any UI, and his portfolio clearly tells that story. So it just gets down to like personal interest and what you're really passionate about.
Do you have a link to that? I'm curious.
I can try to pull it up while
Yeah.
Joy goes.
Yeah, so Nicholas basically said everything that I wanted to say. No, I think like with the portfolio thing, like in two parts. So the first, to Nicholas's point, I think defining or having a very clear idea yourself of what you want to do is really important. And that's the first thing. So are you more interested in UX? Are you more interested in UI? Are you more interested in product? And having that in the back of your mind as you're applying for roles is actually really great, because it lets you know whether the role, like, one, is actually aligned to what you're looking for, but also two, is the company's definition of, like that type of designer, does it align with your understanding of what that is? And I think it's very contextual depending on startup, depending on where you go. And the understanding of UX, product, and UI, I think, is a lot better now than it was before, but there you might still run into folks who see at a very shallow level, I want a UX designer, I see value in it, but they don't really know exactly what that person does. And so that's like the second part. And then I think once you've defined your goal of, I want to be this type of designer, to Nicholas's point, you want to gear your portfolio as a story that you're telling to your audience. So if you're looking for a UX role, then you're going to gear your story from a UX perspective. So with that said, do you have case studies showcasing the way that you think about things, integrating users into like your entire process, whether you've only done UX research and like stop there without going into any sort of like wireframes or high fidelity, like what is your focus versus UI? I would look for more portfolio pieces that showcase, either if you're going into a company that's looking for you to take free reign of like a new design system, you get to craft everything from the start, or a company who is already well established and they want to see, hey, how do you follow like our guidelines? How can you like, do you understand grids? Do you understand how to make things pixel perfect? So depending on the company too, what a UI role would look for might be different, but having the rationale and the technical skill for being able to do the UI is important.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. There's always a lot of different opportunities and different areas of focus where you can specialize in as designers as well, which is always super cool, and have that reflect in your portfolio. I'm going to take a question from Slido. And also, if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free to post them in Slido, or if you would like to talk to our speakers, you can raise your hand and ask if you want. No pressure. And this is actually a common question we get asked to me and like design buddies is, it's anonymous. My background is architecture. Is coding integral to succeeding as a UX UI designer, or do designers need to code, or do designers need to know like basic coding? Because I know a lot of people are afraid of design because they think they need to code, but that answer could be different depending on who you talk to. So I'd love y'all's thoughts on, does coding help you succeed as a UX UI designer?
I could take a stab at this one. So I think depending on who you're speaking to, you'll get a different response. So I'm actually curious to see how Nicholas and Grace will respond after. For me, I don't think coding is integral in the sense that you, as like a UX designer or product designer, I would not suggest be also the person who's coding. And that comes down to being the person at the restaurant who's like, you're serving the food, you're, picking up the phone calls, you're greeting people, you're bringing them in. Like it's a lot to do. But with that said, going back to the architecture analogy, an architect would need to understand, like you're designing the blueprint, you're designing all of these things, but it has to make sense. It, like the bathroom can't be like, all the way at the top with like some of these things separated, because underneath, like all of the piping has to connect, and like you need to be able to fit in lighting in there as well. And so I think having an understanding of the connections will definitely make you a stronger designer. But as for being the person who executes those, I don't think it's something that designers need to do.
100%. It totally depends on what you're trying to do or what your career goals. I mean, I have designer friends that they like to code too, and they sometimes end up going for roles more in like design systems, and they become more like design engineers that they design the components that they're going to be used in the product, but they also like to build them and work closely with engineers to deploy them. In my case, I don't code, nothing at all. But it's really important to work really close with engineers, because at the end of the day, you don't want to design something that it's not technically feasible, right? From an architecture perspective, right? Is this even feasible within your product, but also within a component level as well? So I learned a little bit of HTML and CSS just for the fun of it, honestly, just for playing with it. But my day-to-day job does not require any coding skills whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Like originally I was intimidated. Well, I studied computer science in school, but I was still kind of scared of coding because the stuff I learned in school was like C, more like stuff you won't use for front end at all. So I was a bit intimidated. But I came to realize that it's usually not a job requirement. I know when I was applying to internships, especially for like large tech companies, they have like coding as a plus. So I would get a little bit intimidated by that. But since I have a computer science background, I was actually asked to get involved in some coding, but a manager was great and they recommended me to like not do stuff I'm not interested in. So I feel like you have a choice, and there's also like another role if you're a designer who likes to code called UX engineer or product and design engineer. So there's like hybrid roles between like design and engineering available that I've seen posted in Design Buddies as well, seen coming up. So that's another opportunity for you. But for me in my day-to-day life, it does help having like a coding background. I guess the extent of my coding background is coding my Neopets profile and Tumblr sites and tweaking around with that. So with me and my background knowledge and just that, I was able to collaborate with engineers to build design system components, because like I understand how like flexboxes worked and how CSS worked and how I could tweak different properties and see it in real time. So you don't need that much knowledge, that you don't need to spend like a whole course, I would feel. If you have experience just like tinkering around with like some code to like design like a Tumblr site or something, I would say like that helps. Yeah, definitely. Neopet was the best at building low code masters. But yeah, I would, if anyone is interested in doing design, I would just recommend that like coding, like don't feel too much pressure to learn coding if you don't want to learn, because there's going to be opportunities where you don't have to code, because yeah, you're not, it's like you typically don't do that on the job. Like I don't think any of my designers on my team code as well, like have to know how to code as requirement. Yeah, like I would say like you don't have to code if you don't want to, but at the same time, it might be different at smaller companies. A bigger startup doing multiple hats, like that might be yes. So at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of questions like it depends, but in my experience, no. So yeah. Cool. You got a next question, and I know this is a really common interview question, is what is your process? And I know a red flag of an answer to that is to say like textbook answers. So for both of you, how would you respond to this interview question? What is your process? It's like really vague, but it gets asked pretty often. So yeah, I was wondering, and for buddies preparing for interview prep, maybe this would help as well.
I think that's a great question. And honestly, if I just put in front of an interviewer right now, I'm not sure what I will reply. But I do agree with you that whenever I'm interviewing someone to join my company, just following like the school-driven process and just saying what we're supposed to say by the book usually is not it's not a good answer. I mean, it's a great base, but at the end of the day, in reality, it's like every project is it's different, right? The process for every project is different. And also like saying that you go from research to hand sketches, wireframes, high fidelity mocks, prototypes. In reality, that never happens. Like you jump back and forth and you're always moving around. So every project has its own process. But at the end of the day, to me, everything comes down to look deeply into the problem you're trying to solve. for the most part, the problem that you're looking at the beginning is usually the surface, but it's not really like far deep into the reality of the real problem behind it. So doing that, and also as part of the process, you really need to understand not only the user needs, so most UX designers focus on the user needs, but also their business needs and what the company trying to achieve and how your design is going to help you drive that. And lastly, the technical limitations, like where are the technical limitations to get this done. So getting those three pillars as part of your process, in my opinion, is really important. And last thing that I've seen in some of the great interviews that I had from interviewees is creating like a vision, or at least talking about how your process will connect with the rest of the company and with an overall vision, right? So at the end of the day, even if you're designing a really small feature or a really small enhancement, that needs to connect with the overall machine that the whole company is pushing forward. And how that connects to it and how to drive that forward, I think it's a pretty interesting part of the process.
That's a great answer, Nicholas. And like I honed in on the word connect because for me, like as someone who like has very fresh memory of like going through an interview process as well as having interviewed other people, design, like a good designer to me is someone who's able to connect the dots and organize the chaos. And so when this question is being asked, like what I would be looking for if I were to hire someone is, how do you look at all of these pieces of information, like the context of where you are, what you know, what you don't know, and how do you tackle that? What I like to do is like, I just straight up jump into an example. So I say, okay, you want to see one of like the previous projects that I've done? Let me share my screen and I'll talk you through the process for that one. But the process is essentially like very different depending on what you do. And to Nicholas's point, there is no set process. And that's something that I learned after graduating boot camp. I'm like, okay, first you have to research, then you have to do this. And, you know, like I learned all of these methodologies and the ordering of things. But in reality, when I was thrown into like a, you know, quick environment, sometimes I would skip the lo-fi and I would go straight into hi-fi. But my process there was always integrating users into it as a user experience designer, always considering, okay, am I talking to people? Am I, you know, is this design based on like actual data or rationale? And so, yeah, maybe a little bit of a vague answer here. I think it's great to show examples or be able to talk to previous work that you've done. But in terms of process, like think about what the other person is really looking to understand from you. And do you fully understand what methods go where and how you can mix and match things to make it work? I think being able to make that connection is really important.
Yeah, I love that because I know I haven't done an interview for like over a year, so I haven't been in that situation for a while. But I would also like, I like how you mentioned showing an example and really kind of asking them like what they're trying to get out of it. Are they trying to see how I can connect the dots together, how I can solve problems, how I can story tell, and kind of pick and choose examples based on like what they're looking for. Like, and I guess an interview tip is when you don't understand a question, you can ask like for more specifics, because usually interviewers, when they think of interview questions, they have a specific intent or something they're looking for, so they can like find more out of that as well, like interviewing your interviewer to find out what they're asking you a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. There's an interesting question from the chat from the Slido is, how did you guys incorporate your backgrounds into your UX career? I didn't come from a background in design. Anyone can start too.
You want to take it, Joey?
Yeah, I can go first. So I'm thinking back to when I first started interviewing straight out of boot camp. I was like, I don't really have any real world experience. I was volunteering at the time with Civic Tech Toronto, a community that did have technologists I worked with, but largely my experiences that I talked about were outside of design and tech. And so there was a time when I worked at a laser eye surgery clinic. The role was called consultant, clinical consultant, clinical counselor. But at the end of the day, they're like, okay, you have numbers. at the end of the month, these are your targets, and you need to get these people to do their eye surgeries. And so when I was working there, what I found was people would come in and it's like a $4,000 surgery. And so there's like one blocker there. So finances, but also people are afraid, like you're having laser go into your eyeball. And when they hear about the process from the eye doctors before they get to me, before I say, here are your documents, this is what the process looks like, we're going to book your surgery now. There are a lot of things that hold people back. And so what I took from that experience of sales/consulting is the number one thing is I learned a lot of empathy in that job and really trying to problem solve. So the person sitting on the other side from me, like what is holding them back? They really want this. They want it enough to have driven all the way to this company to, have a consultation and, they're thinking about it. And so if it's finances, maybe we can get you financing. Maybe there is someone that can help you with that. And I think, in any role that you've worked in, there are ways to transfer those skills. You just have to think about like what you took out of it. Soft skills are actually very key, I think. So like, how did you communicate with people? Where did you show empathy? How did you work with the people that, like your staff members, other colleagues? How did you face a conflict? And so a lot of those things, if you can translate it over to design, it actually like fits one-to-one.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I guess if you think about it, most like designers that I've met and I work with, they usually come from different backgrounds. They all have their own unique story. And I think that's what makes product design, UX, UI design really interesting in a way that everyone comes from different backgrounds and they all bring all of those skills and knowledge into the table. In my opinion, those backgrounds are part of your story. So you should not hide them, right? It's a plus to being a designer. If you're a designer, but also had a training in architecture, it makes you unique in a way, as well as any other profession. What I like to give as a tip though is whenever you're applying to a job, make sure that your portfolio clearly reflects the role they're trying to hire. Because a recruiting person that is going through your portfolio, they want to make sure that they're hiring the person knows how to do their job, or the job they're looking for. So make sure your portfolio talks about UX or UI that you're looking for, like your main case studies are pretty clear at the top. And then your background becomes more as a plus thing at the end, like, oh, and on top of that, I also have a background in architecture and I've done all of these things, which is kind of like the cherry on top. Some of the issues that I've seen with some portfolios before is the opposite, like trying to mix everything, and recruiters and design managers that are looking to hire, they just get confused. Like, are you an architect or are you a UX designer or are you something else? So make sure that's super clear, but don't hide your background. That will be my tip for that.
Yeah, definitely +1. Because the mistake I made before when I was starting out is, growing up, I really liked anime art and drawing, illustration, and also engineering. I called myself like a designer, artist, engineer, content creator. And people like got so confused. So don't do that. People get confused, and really be intentional with your portfolio. But also for me, like, I guess how I kind of showcased that was having like a playground section to showcase like other non-product design work and kind of went about that as well. Yeah. And
also,
go ahead.
just one thing to add, it gets to what are you trying to use your portfolio for? Your portfolio is more a collection of your work or stuff you've done in the past, more like for personal use and to share with friends. Honestly, you can do whatever you want. It's more like your own library. If you're using a portfolio to apply for a job, it's a little different story. You have to make sure you're telling the right story for the recruiter that is looking at it, right? And you should definitely change it for that. When I was applying for jobs like quite a few years ago, I was applying to multiple things at the same time, and I would actually update my portfolio live as I was applying to different things, just making sure that the recruiters were seeing what they're trying to see. So right now it's so easy to update portfolios online that I was basically every single day changing words and little things for that.
Yeah, treat your portfolio like UX project. Their target audience is the recruiter or hiring manager. They have very short attentions. They have a lot of portfolios to go through, so they probably spend less time on your portfolio. So make it like really easy for them to get it. So UX your UX portfolio as well. Yeah, and I also like what Joey said in the chat. That this activity found it super helpful that if you're transitioning from a different role, take old job postings and write down the things you've done in a day to day. And when you compare them with some of the responsibilities you do with UX design, there's always some overlap. Definitely agree. Like for me, even though I thought like bioengineering is like super different because they're like working with something totally different, I was able to take like problem solving, systems thinking, how different cells and molecules work together, into how different components work together on a website. So there's always some like overlap, whether you know it or not. You can just kind of think of it that way and using that to stand out during an interview by highlighting your own unique story. Speaking of different industries, I know a lot of people like might not want to work in tech, but are interested in UX UI design. So just based on for both of you, like what other industries have UX UI opportunities that you've seen outside of tech?
I think it's a really interesting question too, because we would have to define tech first and what tech really means. You probably have seen this coming up online already multiple times, but basically every company and honestly every industry is becoming a technology company. Like as every day we see more companies that were not doing any tech, just starting to do tech. And it's true for many things. So for example, like government, like you used to just go to the DMV to get a driver license. It was there was no technology involved, I guess. And today there is technology involved. So like the government industry could use a lot of help. And also it requires to have a really important tasks that they don't have that much space for error. So that could be a space where UX and UI could really help improve it. You've seen finance, healthcare, automotive, like there's many industries that are slowly starting to get tech and being able to use it. And also remember that product design comes from industrial design, and industrial design goes way back to even technology or UX existed. So industrial design has been around for a long time and is being used across many industries. Industrial designers work everywhere. So technically speaking, UX designers could do the same.
Yeah, just to tap into that, I think when I was looking at this question, I wasn't quite sure like what is being defined like with tech. Like are we asking like is it specifically like the tech industry or that you're working on a tech product versus something that's more like you can touch like in the physical space? I think there to Nicholas's point, technology does like you will most likely end up in a UX or UI role like within tech space to some extent. I never thought I would be working in fintech in the financial industry, but here I am, and it's super interesting working on the banking side. I've worked with the government, working on very like old technology, working on testing platforms for people who are getting hired into the government, and so there is definitely like a lot of room in specific industries. If you're interested in nonprofit or you have certain values that align with a certain organization, like eco companies, things like that, there is room for UX UI. Something I want to point out that's like maybe outside of UX UI is service design. And that is a growing industry. And I think is, to me, I think like an untapped market. Like we should have more service designers. And these are the people who think about the overall big picture. You're thinking about, people inside the organization, how to make things work for them as well as people outside. And something that I like think about is those Walmart self-checkouts. I haven't looked it up, but someone created it. And in the end, it was like a great service design tool for people. Like it became a great service design example where, you're considering getting people in and out faster. That exists in a space that I think is outside of tech. And if the worry is like, oh, am I stuck within the tech sphere? I think there are definitely opportunities out there outside of outside of the computer, outside of the mobile device.
Yeah, definitely. There's also a lot of different cross-functional opportunities. So like, for example, I interned at Intuitive Surgical like 3 years ago now. Well, time flies. As a virtual reality robotic surgery game developer intern, but I designed a lot of the UX for games. VR games specifically training surgeons. So there's definitely a lot of applications to it. And when I think of like other industries, I also think of service design, thinking of like how the flow, how do you want to get from the airport to check in to on the plane, like all these different problems you want to solve, and how might you want to design like a car interface as well. So there's a lot of opportunities outside of tech as well. Oh, that's a really interesting question. And we'll take two more really quick questions. If we don't know what industry we want to go into, for example, like fintech, health tech, etc., what type of project should we have in our portfolios?
I think the project itself, in my opinion, is not as important as the process behind it. So when you're trying to apply for a job, you're just basically showing the process, your design thinking, and showing that you can be flexible to many industries. So to me, that's the most important thing if I were to summarize it in a quick sentence.
Well said. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like I worried about this in the beginning because I knew I wanted to do something like in the games tech industry, but I didn't have any stuff. So yeah. Our last question, because I know we have like a minute left before we can do group photos as well, if y'all want. Is there any other UX/product design career tips or advice that we'd like to share with our buddies today? Or like what would you tell your younger designer self?
Oh man, I could have a whole hour to do this pep talk. I think a couple of things, like looking back in hindsight now, like one is that I being able to make the connections, being able to connect the dots is more important than a very set, like defined process. And I think we've touched on this a little bit. So like the rigidness of like anything that you might have learned in school, not to say like throw it out, because I think it gives you some form of structure to start off from, but there is flexibility, and once you're working, it's actually very different. So that's one thing. Another thing is imposter syndrome is so real, and you might get a couple of rejections, you might get like 100, and I think being able to like stand back up and evaluate, okay, like where are the areas that I need to focus on improving. Maybe you want to A/B test your resume if that's where people are stopping at, or like at what question like in an interview process is like throwing you off. And that's where I would say to tap into talking to other designers, talking to people in the industry, having a mentor has really pulled me through my initial like junior stages of design. At times where I was working on a project where I didn't know whether I was doing the right thing or not, because I'm like, this is not what I learned in school. I'm Googling every day. The having a mentor like actually validate and say, hey, you are on the right track. You're focusing on the right things, like was so great for my mental health moving forward.
I can take a 30-second pass on that. Focus on your interest and what you're passionate about. Make sure your portfolio clearly reflects that and your process. Be prepared to be flexible. As a UX, UI designer, product designer, every day your job is going to change quite a bit. So be ready for that. And aim for the right size company or team. And what I mean by that is if you join a startup, you're the only designer, you're going to have to do a lot of things, and people are going to look up to you to be that person or that driver. But maybe sometimes starting as a little bigger company where you have mentors and people to rely on is a little better to get you started before you actually take the task of or joining a smaller company. Last thing is breaking into tech could feel really hard at the beginning, but once you do, other doors will open. So be flexible in that sense as well.
Yeah, thanks y'all for sharing. Yeah, I definitely agree. I would definitely tell my younger self like all those things. Even so, I'm still like really new in my career. I resonate with a lot of that. But yeah, we're gonna do a group photo if y'all want. I know I'm just like we're at this point, like maybe Zoom for now or whatever. But yeah, if you want to turn your camera, we can be in our group photo. We have I know it's a nice group photo link, but that's okay. But yeah, feel free to turn your camera if you want to be part of our group photo. I will count down 5 seconds for y'all to turn your camera if you wish. It's just for fun, something I like to do. And I'm really happy to see some y'all have y'all in Design Buddies Zoom backgrounds too. All right. And feel free to like, if you want to share any takeaways, feel free to post on socials. With that, I'm going to count down. Feel free to bring any object you want as well. I have Fluffle here with me. And yeah, if you want. All right. 5, 4, 3. Oh, also, if you don't want to turn on camera, you can also react. Then it'll be captured in as well. 3, 2, 1. Smile. Awesome. Love all the reactions. I usually take a couple and choose the one everyone looks the best in. So yeah, with that, thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to stop streaming on YouTube. So bye, YouTube buddies.